My name is Teddi Bishop, and this is the Volumetric Flask digital badge. For this, I'm going to be using a 250.00 milliliter volumetric flask, and these are calibrated to record a specific volume, which is shown by that red marking right there, and they are accurate up to 2 significant figures. Here I am just going to be rinsing this with distilled water to show you that it drains properly, and I did wash it just before this, so it should drain properly without leaving any droplets on the sides of the flask. So there you can see there aren't really any droplets in the mouth of the flask there, which shows that it is clean. So here I have this blue solution is a salt water solution from the analytical balance badge in just a 100 milliliter beaker, and I'm going to be transferring it into the volumetric flask using this funnel that I have placed onto the flask here. And as you can see, I am holding it just slightly above the mouth of the flask so that it does not create like an air section with the mouth of the flask. So I'm just going to be holding the funnel slightly above the flask while I pour this solution in. And now, unable to quantitatively transfer the salt solution into the flask, I am using some distilled water, as you can see here, to rinse out that 100 milliliter beaker to make sure I get all of the salt residue on the sides of the beaker. And then I'm just pouring all that water into there just to ensure I get all of the salt that I had measured out on the analytical balance. Now here you can see I'm going to just continue to partially fill this volumetric flask with just some more water, not salt solution this time. Once again, using the funnel as I showed earlier, and I am just going to partially fill it most of the way up, but not all the way to the 250 milliliter mark. Now, after removing the funnel from the flask, I'm going to mix the solution thoroughly to really mix that salt solution and the water together inside the volumetric flask. In order to do that, we first need to cover the top of the flask with parafilm. So here, as you can see, I am taking off the paper backing from the parafilm and just stretching it out in all directions so that it more thoroughly is able to cover the mouth of the flask. And then I'm going to pull tightly as I stretch it over the mouth, and then wrap the edges around the side of the flask to really stretch those edges and get them to stick more securely to the sides of the flask. Now when I mix the solution in the flask, I am going to cover my hand with a sheet of paper towel just in case any of the liquid spills out of the flask. That is there to soak it up, so I'm just going to take this paper towel and wrap it around the mouth of the flask with my gloved hand. And then I'm just going to tilt the flask upside down and shake it around a little bit, and then tilt it back up. And then I'm just going to keep repeating this process several times until the solution is thoroughly mixed. And now that I have removed the parafilm from the mouth of the flask, I am just going to lightly tap the flask against the palm of my hand to release any bubbles that might be in the liquid, so that it doesn't affect our volume inside the flask there. And now I'm going to finish filling this flask all the way up to the calibrated mark there, that red mark, using this pasture pipette that I have here. In order to use this pipette, I am first going to squeeze down on the pipette bulb and then dip the tip of the pipette into the liquid, in this case just water again, and then squeeze the pipette out to dispense the liquid into my flask. So that is what I'm doing here, just using one pipette full of water at a time to kind of gradually increase my volume until I reach that 250 milliliter mark that I am looking for. And again, I am doing this all at eye level with the mark to ensure that I get an accurate volume that I can very clearly see on the correct level. And now I have finished filling my volumetric flask all the way up to the mark. And as you can see here, the top of the meniscus is right at the 250 milliliter mark there on the flask. Now that I have finished filling my volumetric flask, I am just going to mix it one more time, since I did add some extra water into that solution to make sure it's all thoroughly incorporated. So here I have another piece of parafilm that I am once again going to just remove the backing and then stretch out that parafilm to make it a little bit bigger. And then once again very tightly stretch it over the mouth of the flask and then wrap it around the sides so that it is tightly secured to the flask. And once again, I'm going to be using a paper towel just when I wrap my hand around the flask in case of any leaks. And then I am going to be using the same mixing procedure that I used earlier, in just putting my thumb over the mouth of the flask there, then tipping it upside down and shaking it around a little bit, and then just repeating this until it is thoroughly mixed. And now that I am done mixing, I am going to remove the parafilm and dispose of that just in the trash later, and then just going to wipe up some of the water that's on the counter there. And then that is it for the volumetric flask badge.